very long time. As you can see, I need to buy a new one, but I'm too lazy for that.
All right. So I've been over this a few times, but I think the whole point of sort of this conversation here is to highlight really rock solid freelance developers to sort of, like I said, show yourself as the signal in the freelance noise.
Okay.
It's becoming increasingly difficult for freelance developers to show that they are actually the skilled freelance developers, to show that they have good communication skills, good interpersonal skills, good team skills, good as well as the technical skills. And so the point of this series is to connect with and highlight those developers that are actually good and know what they're talking about.
Yeah, definitely.
So today we're speaking with William. William is in Colorado. Why don't you? And the structure of sort of this conversation will have three parts. The first part will be a little bit of backstory, how we sort of got into programming. And the second part is more of a technical conversation, and then that third part is we're actually going to go look into some code itself.
Okay.
So before we start out, you can hear me all right?
Yeah, definitely.
Awesome. Yeah. So you're in Colorado, right?
Yeah.
So how did you get into programming? How did you what first sparked your interest in programming?
So that's the thing. Like when I was like 11 years old, I got my first computer. And I mean, at first, like every kid, I was playing like video games and stuff. And one day I just wanted to like, like I was basically addicted to the video game, and I felt like I was becoming the slave of the machine, and I wanted to reverse this tendency. So I just took Google and I was like, okay, how do I learn to program? And I found a bunch of resources in French at the time, and I studied code in C, which I really enjoyed, but it was like a little boring in a way, because like, you make programs in like a command line, and it's very far from an actual video game or anything like that. So I switched to the web, which was more rewarding, because I could have like visual results pretty fast and get my ideas like real pretty quickly. So I switched over to web development. So I started to do some PHP, MySQL, JavaScript, all these things. And later on, when I was 16, I joined the first startup, and that's really when I started to like get heavily into coding, like even more than before, and get more into a professional kind of code. And then I did a bunch of things, going to boot camps, keep doing like personal project, going to meetups, meeting other developers, entrepreneurs, investors, all that. And then I went to like a really good engineering school in France that had like a really hard barrier to entry. And that's where like I really got confirmation that I was actually pretty good at that. And after that, I just started to code professionally, find a job, making my own projects, and here I am.
So what was your first big project that you did either on your own or were a big contributor to?
Oh, there was a lot. I'd say the first big project is the one I did when I was 16. So this startup that was basically trying to make like a competitor of LinkedIn, but more on a project-oriented aspect, where like the goal was really to help people create a team and manage their whole project on the platform. So this was very challenging. There was like a lot of things to do. Like it was like kind of a whole social network with a bunch of very interesting features. So it was very challenging. And I got exposed to NodeJS, the first version of NodeJS at the time. So it was really cool.
So were you part of the team building that, or a larger organization, or was that more solo?
No, we were like a team, definitely. So it was my first like team project for something that was really big, and we were partnering with like a consultant for a company called Renault in France, which is a car manufacturer, and the guy needed to make like a chat that you can use in your car, basically, and we needed to make a chat for our project as well. And that's where I got introduced to like Node.js, real time, and these kind of things.
Uh-huh.
It was more of a teamwork. It was a small team, mainly students in engineering school, but there was like this really good consultant that was like mentoring us, and I was working with him directly. So I got a lot of exposure to like really professional work, you know?
Uh-huh. So you're working in Node on that project. What else were you working in there? Were you working on more back end or front end? I know Node is
So like as a startup,
back-end
the
oriented.
resources were very limited. So we had to work on like everything, all of
Yeah.
us, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah, so I was doing some PHP for the backend, and except for the Node.js part that was handling the whole chat system,
Right.
we used EasyRTC at the time, which is like a framework like to simplify. It's like an abstraction layer of WebRTC. So yeah, I was doing like PHP, Node.js, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, everything. You know.
Right. So from there, where did you go? How long did you work on that project for?
So we worked on this for like about 2 years before we
Uh-huh.
decided to give up because it was just really hard. um, and yeah, after that I went to like boot camps, still to confirm my skills because I dropped out of high school, right?
Right.
And I wanted to have like a certificate or just like a paper because that's how the industry works, unfortunately. Um, so I got it, and then I got the whole school thing. So it turns out great.
So what were the primary focuses of some of these boot camps you were at?
So the first one was called the 3W Academy in Paris, and so it was like a 90-day intense formation. So they were focusing on web development, and the reason when I went there, the director asked me like, "You already know how to code, so why do you want to come here?" And I said, I code, but I want to get more good practices and having code that's like that look good and that's efficient, and I want you guys to teach me that. And he was like, okay, so we have a class starting in 1 month with the teacher is the CTO of a company, so that's definitely going to fit with your needs. So that's why I like just paid like 3,000 euros and I just did it. I'm pretty satisfied with the result, honestly. Like the guy didn't know Node.js at the time, and I I gave him like he was actually like trying to get a job, another job of CTO in another company in London, and I got him the tip of Node.js, and he got the job because of that.
Uh,
That's a different story. So yeah,
so so where did you go after W3?
so after the 3W Academy, I went to 42 in Paris.
Right.
So
That's an accelerator or a school in Paris.
it's a school.
Okay.
It's actually a very particular kind of school. It's a mix between like a boot camp and an actual school, where like um, it's pretty disruptive. Like the school is completely free of charge. You don't have to pay anything for it. But the downside is that they have a competition that's like really hard. So basically, the first step to get into the school is some kind of IQ test, but it's more oriented like code, where like they give you some weird puzzles and you have to basically figure it out. And they pre-select like candidates on it, and after that you go through something called piscine. In English, you would translate it by pool, where like you have to learn 2 years of a regular school of C in 1 month. So you go to school for 1 month and they give you like so much work, like much more than you can normally handle. So you sleep like 3 hours a night. It's crazy. And basically I got admitted, so I was really proud about that, but I didn't stay very long in the school though, because I felt like, okay, like the level is really good, but after the competition, it slows down a little. You know, it's becoming more of a school. We don't have teachers, and we learn everything on our own, which is something I really appreciate because it's close to the actual reality of software development days to day. And um, so I just left the school a few months after starting the courses because I just felt like I could actually make money directly by coding for a company rather than doing it at school, right?
Right.
So I just went ahead, found a job, and I started my professional journey from there.
So from there, how did you end up in the US?
So that's an interesting story. Actually, I was on Facebook one day and I met my actual wife, and we did chat like online for like a year. And one day I just was okay, like let's meet. So we met, and I never came back to France.
You never went back to France.
Yeah.
So and you've been programming over here in the US since then.
Yeah.
So what how has your experience here in the US been in terms of programming? What have you worked on any interesting projects here?
It's been really great. At first, when I was here, I had to finish like a freelance contract that I made in France. So I just finished it like remotely. And when I finished that, I started looking for a job. And basically, this project that I was making in France was like a whole app/social network to help parents handle their life around their child. And so it was an app to help communicate with the school, with the nannies, the doctors, all that. So it was a pretty big project that I did entirely on my own. So I was like, okay, from there, I know how to do everything, right? I did design the database. I did write the whole API for the server. I did the whole front end. The app is available on Android and iOS. It took me about 2 years to make all of that. And I was like, okay, let's find a job as not even a senior, but more of a lead, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I can handle everything. So that's how I found Tragic Media. And so I've been contracting for them so far. And it's going really great. The pay is good. The developers are pretty nice, actually. I work really well with them, which is, you know, it's not always easy to find people that you can actually work with. And what is great is that like I can teach them a lot of things that they don't necessarily know, and they don't always know what they don't know, which is the same for me. It never stops.
Right. So what's one of the things that you've taught people, or what's a common thing that you notice that a lot of like junior devs don't understand, and that you
honestly, the first thing I would say is Git. Like junior devs have a really limited knowledge of Git, and the big problem is that like, you know, when you work as a team, Git is just a must-have. You know, like you cannot
right
things or not know how to branch and this kind of thing. So I did like update them on all of this part. The second thing is like good practices and really making a code that is like easy to read and that you can maintain easily over time, right? Like I've been over some of their code and some functions were like really long. The naming conventions were not always good. Sometimes they were copying and pasting code instead of like reusing the same one. So there is all of these good practices that I've been like really, you know, getting them into it. And they've been taking some levels, so I'm pretty proud of that.
Yeah, so let's dive into some more technical stuff here, because we've kind of moved into that direction. What I noticed, I mean, the first thing I saw on your LinkedIn profile is it says something like I have code OCD, which yeah. I'm personally a big fan of. Can you describe how you maybe came to have code OCD and what code OCD means to you?
Sure. That's a pretty nice question. Honestly, the OCD came from my own code. You know, like when you code something and 6 months later you come back to it and you're like, oh my God, what did I do? I took so much level in 6 months. I can't believe I was coding this way. So you start like rewriting everything and putting everything back together because you can barely like understand what you were doing yourself, you know?
Right.
So that's how I started to be like, okay, I have to do something better. I have to name my functions better. I have to write fewer code. I have to reuse things better. And I just can't be lazy about the way I code. You know, it's not just good to have something that works. You have to, I mean, coding is an art, you know? You have to make it beautiful or it's just not good. And if people don't care about this, then they're just bad for sure. So, or not good yet. So that's how it really started. I started to have OCD by like really looking at my own code first. And then it was like going on websites that were in production and seeing a bug here and there and looking a little bit into their source code and being like, okay, they did this. That's not exactly the way it should be done. Or even looking at answers in Stack Overflow and being like, that's not exactly a good answer, even though it's like the top rated answer. I'm like, okay. So basically I got all this frustration from looking my own code first, but then the code of other people and being like, okay, there is like, people need to be more rigorous in terms of code and I need to apply that to myself.
Right.
So
right. There's a saying that there's two types of people that read your code. There are three entities that read your code. It's the computer, which doesn't care how the code looks. It just cares that it functions logically. But then there is yourself 6 months from now, and then the rest of your team. So 6 months from now, are you going to be able to understand the code that you've written? Why have you written it that way? Are you able to reuse any of that code that you wrote in other places in the app? Not like copy and pasting it, but actually you implement those APIs that you've written. But then the rest of the team has to understand it as well. They should be able to look at your code and determine what is this function for, without having to dive into a deep pile of comments. Like good code doesn't need a lot of comments. If you see a code that has a paragraph of comments attached to it, it probably needs to be rewritten because it's just not very clear. Good code can comment itself. So things like function naming and consistent function naming, things like the overall readability of your code. Is it formatted well? Can I scan through it quickly and get a solid understanding of what this file or class or function does? Or am I gonna have to sit at my computer and get my like super reading glasses on and like go and pick through every single line and try to like, I'm gonna have to go on my whiteboard and map out all of the variable changes and all of the assignments in this one like 200 line long function that is doing 9 million things and has a bunch of external side effects. I mean,
yeah, definitely. And you know what? I think the one of the big problem of software engineering is that there is this cliche that you need to be like super good at math or things like this. And there is actually a difference between discrete and linear mathematics, but people don't speak about that much. And I think the big problem is that all these people have like this heavy focus on mathematics. It's pretty common that like during an interview, like people will ask you about the big O notation or these kind of things.
Right.
When they ask me about that, I always like, who cares? Seriously. I mean, okay, there is this difference between like, the iterative loop and the other one.
Like recursive functions and nested loops, things like that.
Yeah, but at the end, the exercise of coding is more like writing a book, like a lot of good developers are blogging. And I think it's because the exercise is very similar, like
right, absolutely.
When you create a function, you create a word, right? And at the end, your whole class is like a sentence. You see what I mean? And,
right.
And that's the way I see code. And I think that's the way you have to see it to write clear code,
Absolutely. I mean, everything from the way you structure your files to the way you name and organize your classes tells you and the people that you're working with what the point of this code is. And you know, looking, I dig through a lot of code bases, and a lot of the times you come across code and you're like, is this code intentionally there? Like, is this code doing anything in the project right now? Because you come across a lot of phantom code, especially like digging through code bases or debugging, where you look at code and you're like, this is not touching any, like these sets of files aren't doing anything. Like this code is never running. So why is it here?
Because, you know, like some developer just wrote it, it was doing something at some point, and then they removed the call to the function and they didn't remove the actual code. And that's how you end up having a lot of junk in your code base, you know?
So your primary skill set, would you say it's in the JavaScript world, or how would you describe your primary, your strengths as a programmer in terms of your technical strengths?
My focus is definitely on the web, for multiple reasons. The first reason is that I think that web apps in general are better than their native counterparts. By that I mean that, like, for example, you had a long time ago, you had MSN Messenger, right? Native app. Later on, you had Facebook, you know? Then if you speak about like torrenting stuff for illegal downloads, you had like Napster. And then later on, you had Mega Upload. And I mean, that's true for a lot of things. Like usually, an app that's coded natively, with time, if there is a competitor that comes and that is web-based, users will prefer the web version. And I think that over time we'll have more and more apps that will be web-based, and native apps will tend to disappear. So that's why I'm like so focused on the web. Then the next thing is there is an economical reason to that too. Like, for example, if I take JavaScript, I can do basically everything with it. I can do an API, I can do a web front, I can do a mobile app, even though it's not completely JavaScript, because behind that you have some mechanism. But one company can choose to hire one Swift developer and one PHP developer and one JavaScript developer, etc., and someone that's super good at CSS, or they can choose to take one guy that does JavaScript that can handle everything, and maybe one guy that's super good at like HTML and CSS to have like a really spot on front, you know? So that's where my focus is. And then I have to admit that I really like TypeScript.
Right.
That developers are divided about it.
So describe the difference between TypeScript and JavaScript real quick.
Sure. So JavaScript is JavaScript.
Right.
It's the native language of the web, if I can call it this way. And TypeScript is a superset of JavaScript. So it's basically JavaScript with some more stuff. And the thing that TypeScript adds to JavaScript, like its name indicates, is the types. So you can basically define types to your variables. You can give the return type of your functions, and all of this is pretty useful. It makes you more productive in many ways. It helps you like literally see that a bug is coming before you even see it. And it just helps you writing cleaner code.
And yeah, the compiler can write your code for you instead of you doing it.
Yeah. And of course, then there is the whole compilation system, where at the end, that's the little thing with TypeScript. Is funny because when you compile your code, it becomes JavaScript, you know, and the types are not really there, but they are there during the actual build time when you actually work on your project, and that's where they are the most useful at the end.
So within the JavaScript web world, what platforms or frameworks or technologies do you specifically focus on? React, Angular, NodeJS, Ionic?
For the front, I've been using Angular. I've been using React. I'm interested in learning Vue because I think it has a lot of potential. I've been using Ionic for mobile apps. I like Ionic and the team behind it. I think they're doing really an amazing work. Especially because since the version 4 has been released, now it's framework agnostic, so you can use it with Angular or React or Vue or nothing at all, which I think is really, really nice.
So what is the biggest difference between something like Ionic and something like a React Native?
Well, I mean, React Native will turn your JavaScript code into a native code, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you will have a native app at the end. But Ionic will create a web view inside the native apps. So it's called an hybrid app.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not really native. It's basically like just an app that's like a browser that runs your web app on the front. So you can't really tell the difference. A few years ago, hybrid apps were not really good because like it was taking a lot of resources on the phone and the performances were usually extremely poor.
Right.
But now the devices are handling it pretty well, and it's nearly impossible to make the difference. And then the other advantage of Ionic is that you can easily release your app as a PWA, progressive web app, which is something that has been theorized by Google in 2015, I think, which is basically like it's like a web app, but faster, that can handle like offline support and this kind of things. And you can download it directly on your phone with the little icon, just like if it was an app. Yeah, it's really great.
So do you use any other types of things like PhoneGap or Cordova, or is it mostly Ionic?
Well, I mean, Ionic is using Cordova, so you don't really have the choice when you use Ionic. You have to use Cordova as well. But right now they are switching to something called what was the name? I don't remember. It's not Protractor. This is the test framework of Angular, but there is something else. Capacitor. I found it. So they are developing their own alternative to Cordova, and what they're trying to do is to bring native function support inside a PWA, which is really cool. So there is already some native supports in PWA, but they're trying to literally complete it, and that's really great. So yeah, I've been using Cordova so far, but maybe not in the future.
So let's get into some actual code here. You sent me over some files that we could take a look at, and I have them up on my screen here. Let me just pull that up. There we go. All right, can you see my screen here?
Yeah.
Cool. So you sent me over, I think, five kind of just GitHub gists of code you are looking at. Some React and some Ionic. And I was thinking to really sort of demonstrate sort of technical expertise, you could maybe walk me through some of this code and sort of your thought processes around various decisions that were made, why they were made, sort of the structure of the code, and maybe show off a little bit of that code OCD we described. So of these, right now I'm on the sales API. Could you maybe describe a little bit about, here's some of that OCD we see right there. Love that. And we got some down here. It's really rock solid readability, I think. But yeah, if you could maybe give some background as to this code snippet, and then maybe walk through some of the decision points a little bit.
Sure. So first, let's describe the file layer. So that's the file I wrote for an Ionic app that I was developing.
Right.
So basically, I was developing both the front end and the server on this app. And I used Sales.js, which is a pretty underrated framework. Honestly,
yeah, I'd never actually heard of Sales.js until I looked through this.
Yeah, it's a pretty nice framework, underrated. So I made this class to connect my Ionic fronts to my sales back. So that's what this file is doing. It's handling a bunch of things like requests to the API, as well as handling cases like if the servers get shut down, for example, I show to the app, I show to the user that the server is off, and so please wait. Let's get to the top of that file. So I can describe it. Okay, so the first thing I import on the top are, so the first one is injectable. It's an Angular thing to create a service. The platform is Ionic thing for telling if I'm on iOS or Android or these kind of things. Spinner dialog and splash screens are
those are UI components.
UI components to show either the splash screen or a spinner dialog.
Right.
File transfer, file upload, etc. is to upload files. ReactJS, so that's for the map function that I'm using probably a little later. Declare var IO. So the sales client is not a TypeScript stuff, and there is no types available for it. Right.
Right. So looking at this first class here, the sales API call. The point of this class is to explicitly define what an API call looks like for and all of the components that are needed in that call. Correct?
Excuse me. Can you repeat that?
The point of the sales API call class is to explicitly define all of the various things that go into creating an API call. So this API call could be used for various bits of functionality, but you're creating a singular entry point into that API call, or into the you're creating a unified or central entry point for the rest of your code to access the sales API.
Yeah, exactly, because I don't want to have to repeat code all over the day, right? So I'm creating a single class that can handle all of this, definitely.
Right.
So yes, so I can define on top in the constructor, I set my default variables. So the base URL is the domain and the actual API endpoints. The bearer is for the token, and then you have like the whole sales connection, etc. That's initialized right there. And if there is no token, I get one, etc.
So, and obviously, I think that's a very good practice. Can you talk a little bit about your use of promises in this code?
Yeah, definitely. So promises are useful because you can just wait after a code finished to execute to get your result and keep going. You can use await with it in an async function, which is really useful because you can make sure that like nothing happens at the wrong time. So that's why I've been using many promises in this code. So the upload media function is pretty simple. Actually, I just literally like upload the file with the functions, and I'm just using something from Ionic for that. So there is nothing really crazy about this code. But I mean, literally, you can see that like I'm using a promise inside the promise I return. That's classical, right? But yeah, I just prefer promise over, you know, in Angular, there is something called, I have it on the tip of my tongue, observable. And I just think that promises are cleaner, simpler. So that's mainly why I've been using them instead of like the regular Angular way of doing things. So it's more of a classical JavaScript approach.
So why do you like, what would you say the big difference between a promise and an observable is?
I think the biggest difference is just, okay, if I could just compare it, like the premises is the car, and you can use it to drive from A to B, and the observable is like a transformer, you know, and there is no need to use a transformer to go from A to B. That's mainly why I'm using the premises.
Right. The promise is a container of something that will happen in the future, and you're waiting on that to happen. Whereas an observable is more of a direct observation of an object where you're reacting to changes of that object.
It takes more resources. The code is not as clean when you're using them, and I mean, just simpler to use the premises. So it's easier to read.
So I think we'll only have time for oh shoot, I just X'd out of things. So I think we'll only have time to look through one more bit of code here. Did you have one that you specifically wanted to look through?
I mean, this one is nice, but it can be a little boring in a way. Let me check. I think the server one can be interesting because it's more of a backend thing, and we already did the front. Yeah. So
this one right here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking maybe we could walk through this and then a quick one through the React. I mean, this one's a small little bit here. How does that sound?
Yeah, that's fine. We can do that.
So is this the React one you wanted to look at?
Yeah, I have two React, but this one is fine, definitely.
Which one? The medium one or the dangerous or the
So the article one is interesting. There is a bunch of loops. There is modulos in there. Yeah, I guess the medium one is better.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So this is just a short line of code or a short little bit of code, and as you can see from the description up there, it says a simple React component to produce a list of articles from a medium user account. So essentially, this runs a query on the Medium API, right?
Let me check that. I haven't looked at this code in months. But yeah, that's basically what it does. Yeah, okay. So yeah, I don't show the part where I'm actually calling Medium, but that's what it's doing by calling a new article model. I just give it the Medium user, and it takes care of grabbing everything. Yeah. So this articles component is basically connecting to the Medium of someone, and grabs all the articles and displays them to the user.
And so can you describe a little bit of this this little section right here?
Sure. So I'm waiting for the the component moment is a life cycle thing where like I'm waiting for the components to be ready in order to start playing with the data and display and everything. So what it does is, can you go a little bit up so I can read it?
Oh yeah, sorry.
Thank you. It's fine. Okay, so first I'm getting the articles from my article model that I set up earlier. So my article model grabs the articles from Medium, and I grab them with the getArticles function. And I set them into the articles variable. And then I do a bunch of things to make sure that like I can reset my article and refresh the content in case there is a new article that's posted. And then I update my state for my components. The build article row, so yeah. So this is basically a loop that's either displaying basically what it's doing is that like on one row it will show 3 articles, and on another row it will show 2 articles, and then 3 articles, and then 2 articles. So that's just a fancy way of displaying it. And yeah, there is one article that's always forgotten in the loop, because when I do 3, I have 3. When I do 2, I miss 1. So I need to keep this one in memory for later. That's what the delay factor is.
So how are these articles being rendered? I mean, I see the render function down here, but
so this creates the article rows, and if I go to the build render articles, so I'm making sure that I have articles, because if I don't have any, I don't need to show anything. And then I map my object articles, where I have all of my articles, and for each article I create an article with my article components. That's on another file, and I pass the props containing the information about the article to display it, basically.
That makes sense. Let's dive into this last file before we run out of time here. So,
sure.
So this is an ExpressJS thing. Can you talk a little bit about ExpressJS?
Yeah. So Express is it's a framework server side to basically run a web server using Node.js. So you can basically display your HTML documents using it, and you can make dynamic apps with it. So what this file is doing, I was building an app with Next.js 5 because I wanted to have server-side rendering for my React app. So the advantage of server-side rendering is you have multiple things. First, there is the SEO. So when Google receives a server-side rendered code, it directly sees all the HTML, the styling, and all of the semantic structure is there. So it can actually use all these informations to reference the website, rank it, etc. But when the app is not server rendered, Google will receive a very short code of HTML that doesn't contain any semantic information, so they cannot use it for referencing the website. So this is the reason why I needed to have like a server-side rendered app. So this file is handling a bunch of things like serving the app, obviously,
right?
But also, yeah, it's complying with some things like if you run a lighthouse test on an app, you will have some feedbacks from this tool telling you if your app is too slow and why it's too slow. So it's taking care of a bunch of things like having the SSL enabled, so it can be a progressive web app, because you cannot have a progressive web app without the SSL enabled. Using HTTP2 to serve the application, which is a little faster than the regular HTTP protocol. Caching some information. It's also compressing the text using zip compression. So that makes the loading a little faster as well. So yeah, and it's also grabbing some, it's handling some errors. Like for example, if this code can find your SSL certificate, then it will tell you, well, exactly where you are actually, that you need to do some work in order to get your SSL certificate to work. And there is like 2 files to get. So I get 2 error handlings on this. So it's a pretty simple file, but it's an interesting one because it takes care of a lot of aspects. Usually when you see like a server.js, a regular server.js from an Express app, it's a little shorter than that, and I just made it a little more complex so I could like handle more cases and really like make sure that my server is like doing a lot of good work.
Awesome. Is there anything in particular you want to point out about how you wrote this code? I see all your OCD stuff in here. Anything in particular you want to highlight here? Any function you want to dive a little bit deeper into?
Well, I mean, maybe this one right there where you are, at line 119. Because if you go on line 126, you have something with like a file called sw.js. So basically what I'm doing here
what is SW right there?
What is what?
What is SW?
So SW is for service worker. So as I said earlier, this app is a progressive web app. And in order to have your app as a progressive web app, you need to create a service worker which handles the offline mode. So if you want your app to still work if the server is down and the user already came to your app, to your website before, then it will be able to keep using your website even though it's down. It won't get like any updated information, but it can still navigate through and get fake response from the server that have been previously registered by the service worker, which is file is handling. And does
that also handle like if any user input that needs to be saved to a database somewhere that handles the saving of that once the user is back online?
Yeah, absolutely. That's the whole point of a service worker. If like if the user is like submitting a form, then the service worker will take care of like keeping the information and send it when the computer is back online.
Right. Normal node here. Can you see me again?
Yep.
Awesome.
I do.
Cool. So that ran a little bit longer than I was expecting.